On April 15, 2010, Timothy B. Hennis stood in a military courtroom. He was 52 years old, a retired Army Master Sergeant, a man with a spotless record. But as the verdict was read, that life didn't just collapse. It was erased. For the second time in his life, Hennis was sentenced to death, not by a civilian jury, but by his own peers. A punishment handed down decades after a court had already set him free. It was a moment that seemed to shatter the most sacred rule in American law, double jeopardy. To understand how a hero became a ghost, you have to look at the blood he thought he'd washed away. It was Mother's Day, and neighbors were worried. At 367 Summer Hill Road, the lights were left on for days, and from inside, they could hear a sound that made their blood run cold. A baby crying for days. When the police finally kicked in the door, they found a house of horrors. In one room, 22-month-old baby was standing in her crib, dehydrated, starving, but alive. She was the lucky one. Down the hall, the scene was different. A mother and her 2 young daughters had been slaughtered. It wasn't just a murder, it was an execution. That day, the safety of this military town died, and a 25-year game of legal cat and mouse began. If you're new here, subscribing and liking the video is completely free, but it goes a long way in helping this channel reach more viewers who care about justice and truth. May 1985, Fayetteville, North Carolina. A military town built on discipline, a town built on the Army. Uniforms are as common as stop signs. People here don't ask where you work, they ask what rank you are. Captain Gary Eastburn of the U.S. Air Force was away. He was in Alabama attending specialized training. Back home, his wife Catherine held down the fort with their 3 daughters. Kara was 5 years old. Erin was 3. And the baby, Jaina, was just 22 months old. They were a young family on the edge of something new. Gary had orders. England was next. A fresh start overseas, new memories waiting to be made. But there was one problem. They couldn't take their dog. Dixie was a beautiful white English setter, gentle, affectionate, and deeply loved. Catherine didn't want to leave her behind with just anyone. So she did what countless military spouses had done before her. She placed a small ad in the local paper. English setter needs good home. On May 7th, a knock came at the door. The man standing outside was 27 years old, clean-cut, soft-spoken. He wore the look of someone who belonged in Fayetteville, a sergeant stationed at Fort Bragg. His name was Timothy Hennis. He smiled. He admired the dog. He spoke politely with Catherine. Nothing about him raised alarms, no warning bells, no instincts screaming danger. Catherine handed him the leash. In that moment, she thought she was giving Dixie a better life. She had no way of knowing she was also opening her door to a predator. 4 days passed. In Alabama, Gary Eastburn tried calling home again and again. No answer. In Fayetteville, neighbors began to notice things that didn't sit right. The lights at 367 Summer Hill Road stayed on through the night. The mailbox overflowed. The house felt abandoned. And then there was the sound. A neighbor heard it first. A thin, high-pitched cry coming from inside the house. It didn't stop. It wasn't loud, but it was desperate. On May 12th, police finally arrived at 367 Summer Hill Road. They didn't knock long. The door was forced open. Inside, the air felt wrong. Thick, stagnant. A scent every veteran detective recognizes instantly. They found Catherine first. She had been sexually assaulted. She had been stabbed again and again. There was no sign of struggle that suggested panic or theft. This wasn't a robbery that spiraled out of control. This was personal, intentional. Then they moved through the house. Kara, 5 years old. Aaron, 3. Each girl found in her own bedroom, each brutally killed. The violence was excessive, furious. This wasn't a crime committed in haste. It was a massacre carried out inside a family's home. And then they reached the crib. 22-month-old Jana was still there, alive, barely. She had been alone in that house for nearly 4 days, living with the dead bodies of her mother and sisters. She was severely dehydrated. Her diaper was soaked through. Her throat was raw. Her voice was gone from crying. She was the only survivor, the only witness, and she was too young to tell anyone what she had seen. Outside the crime scene, someone approached the police with critical information about the murder. That's when they found their first loop, something to pull the story back on itself. The neighbor said he remembered the night of the murders. He saw a man leaving the Eastburn house. He was calm, carrying a heavy trash bag. The witness remembered one detail clearly. The man was wearing a members-only style jacket. Investigators turned to the newspaper ad, "English setter needs good home." That trail led them to a name, Timothy Hennis. He fit the description. Tall, blonde, military, a Fort Bragg sergeant who had been inside the home days before the murders. When police searched his trash, they found something unsettling. Neighbors had seen Hennis burning items in his backyard, and when investigators checked local dry cleaners, they found the jacket. In 1986, Timothy Hennis stood trial. The case was circumstantial, but heavy. The neighbor took the stand and pointed directly at him. "That's him," he said. "That's the man with the trash bag." The jury agreed. Hennis was sentenced to death. He put on the red jumpsuit. He was sent to North Carolina's death row to wait for the needle. But Hennis was a soldier. He appealed, and in 1989, the conviction collapsed. The North Carolina Supreme Court ruled the trial had been unfair, tainted by graphic crime scene photos that prejudiced the jury. The state tried again. This time, the defense dismantled the case. No physical evidence tied him directly to the killings. No blood that couldn't be explained by the dog adoption. No fingerprints that mattered. The verdict came back fast. Not guilty. Timothy Hennis walked out of the courtroom a free man. He didn't just return to his life, he reclaimed it. For the next 15 years, Hennis became a ghost. He stayed in the Army, rose through the ranks, served in the Gulf War, earned commendations, retired in 2004 with an honorable discharge and a full military pension. He became a Scoutmaster, a husband, a father. Imagine being his neighbor. You see him mowing the lawn, you pass him at the grocery store, you watch him teach kids how to tie knots. You have no idea you're living next door to a man who was once sentenced to death for the slaughter of a family. Hennis believed he was untouchable. The Fifth Amendment was his shield. Double jeopardy meant the state could never come for him again. But while Hennis rebuilt his life, something else was quietly catching up. Science was moving in the shadows. In 2006, a cold case detective opened a cardboard box that hadn't been touched in years. Inside was a single piece of evidence, a vaginal swab taken from Catherine Eastburn in 1985. Back then, it was useless. In 1989, it was still just biological noise, nothing science could translate into truth. But in 2006, it wasn't evidence anymore. It was a confession. The DNA was finally run, then cross-checked against a profile already sitting in a government database, the one Timothy Hennis had provided during his military career. The result didn't hedge, it didn't speculate, it didn't leave room for doubt. The match was conclusive. The odds of it belonging to anyone else? 1 in a quadrillion.
North Carolina had its killer. They had certainty, they had the truth, and they were completely powerless. Double jeopardy meant the state could not arrest him, not again, not ever. The law that had once protected Hennis now locked justice out. Then someone noticed a loophole. When Timothy Hennis retired from the Army, he didn't fully leave it behind. Under military law, retired service members are still subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The Army didn't ask permission, they issued orders. Hennis was recalled to active duty, not to deploy, not to lead troops, but to stand trial. This wasn't a civilian courtroom. There would be no jury of strangers. This was a court-martial. In 2010, the DNA evidence was laid out in front of a panel of military officers. The defense argued contamination. They questioned chain of custody. They tried to turn science into doubt. But the numbers didn't bend. The facts didn't flinch. The officers weren't just judging a defendant. They were judging a man who had worn the same uniform while carrying a secret this dark. The verdict came back. Guilty. Death row. Again. Today, Timothy Hennis is 65 years old. He sits inside the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, one of only a handful of men on military death row. A soldier sentenced not by civilians, but by the institution he once served. Jana Eastburn is an adult now. She doesn't remember the 4 days she spent alone in that house. She doesn't remember the faces of her sisters. She doesn't remember the crime, but she knows this. The man who took everything from her believed he had outrun the law. He believed time was on his side. He was wrong. Justice didn't chase Timothy Hennis. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. It waited, and when science finally caught up, it made sure there was nowhere left to run. This case remains one of only a handful of times in history where double jeopardy was challenged and defeated by the military. It raises a question that still haunts legal scholars today. Is it better for a guilty man to go free, or for the law to be broken to catch him? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into the Hennis case impactful, consider subscribing to Verdict Vault. We tell these stories with the respect they deserve, ensuring that the victims are never just a footnote in history. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.